Hey everybody, this is Minion Soldier, and this is the Piracy Show. Now, on today's episode, I want to return to the subject of hacking because I've had kind of an idea about how we could improve hacking and mostly reuse a lot of the assets that we currently have in game now and keep the quick hack chips in the game. Because I thought about it and I remembered an old article that CIG posted a long time ago where they were talking about the future of hacking, and this was kind of one of their kind of, brainstorming. This is the spirit of where we want the idea to go. And they talked about having to be on site to make the most dangerous hacks. So what if we were to change these chips to, rather than having, say, a certain speed or a certain amount of errors that they were likely to cost, like the fastest ones cost the most error or cause the most errors, and the slowest ones have the least amount of errors where you have to intervene and continue the hack. What if we changed the chips so that they had a transmission distance, like a range, like a signaling range to them, where the most expensive ones would have the furthest range but be, say, the shortest lived? Or maybe we could just make it, for the time being, just give them an extended range. So what that does in a situation like a satellite hack is, let's say you would still need to go into the satellite, or the comm array to be specific, and place the chip into the transmitter. And what that chip would allow you to do is it would allow you to have remote hacking access to that comm array. You still need to go on site and you still need to put the chip in, but then you get to move away and then continue your hack. Now, in an area like SPK or the police station down on the surface of Lyria, we could actually move a transmitter, put a transmitter. This would involve obviously doing some artwork, so this would be a little bit more heavy lifting, something that we could maybe include in the future. But you could add an exterior transmitter to both these sites. Say SPK, you could put it out on, the ring that kind of surrounds the station. Or on Lyria, you could put a transmitter on the ground outside of the facility. And so what a player would have to do is they would still have to go there. And then they would have to, basically place a chip into that transmitter. But it wouldn't be in a place where they're kind of trapped inside the way you are in SPK or Lyria, because that always involves, let's say if you want to hack down your crime stat, first you have to fight a gun battle to get to that location. And then after you've done that, you're then basically stuck in this location. What this does is this kind of removes that, and instead we add a different game mechanic where if you're flying, let's say, a regular ship like a Constellation, then let's say the best hacking chip has 5 kilometers of range. On a satellite, or maybe in a place like Lyria, that allows you to park your ship and run the hack outside of the range of the defensive guns of the station. But if a player finds out, okay, we've got anomalous readings at Lyria or SPK or at such and such comm array, some player goes to check it out for the UEE. It's a mission that just is generated whenever this occurs. They're going to see you right away and they're going to take action. However, ships like the MSR, ships like the Sentinel, ships like the Herald have a boosted signal range. So they can actually take the range that thing's transmitting at, and they can multiply it by, let's say, a factor of, let's just say 5. So they can communicate with that ship up to 25 kilometers away, whereas a regular ship can only do it at its maximum range, which, for the purpose of argument, we're saying it's 5 kilometers away, because these ships come with basically, transmitters and signaling dishes. They can actually receive these signals much further out. So what a player could do is they could actually kind of build out these ships, whether it's the MSR, whether it's the Sentinel or the Herald. They can build these ships out specifically for stealth. And what would happen is a player comes in and says, oh, there's an anomalous signal or something like that at these stations. They have to then go and actually search for these ships to see where they are. Could be out in space, could be somewhere hidden in a valley, down on the ground, anywhere within, let's say, we're just making up a number right now, 25 kilometers. So that's still, in a three-dimensional space, that's still a fair amount of space to check. And we might have to make some adjustments to how far out you can, scan somebody out. But if you've ever gone down to the surface of a planet and you've been scanning for minerals or anything like that, you know that that's actually still a fairly decent distance, and that gives you a lot of places to hide. Now, we make the hacks, like hacking down crime stat. I would argue maybe that's in the right place because it does take a fair amount of time, but maybe remotely hacking a comm array, we make it take a little bit longer. In the future, we could add more of a mini game, something like the Cyberpunk quick hack mini game, but we could kind of change it up a little bit, add on to it in the future, iterate on the system once we've got it in place. But I think if we kind of make these changes to it, we can make it more of a cat and mouse game. Now, currently in the game, one of the big problems with array hacking or, security status hacking is that it's not really skill-based. Right. It's not really based anything on, how good you are, what ships you're using, or what equipment you have. I mean, there is a little bit of skill in there, of course. You get the Ripper chip. That's the fastest one. Bang. You can get that comm array down very quickly, and you're going to see me do that in the background footage here. But really, a lot of what happens in these missions is ultimately up to chance. It just so happens that in this scenario, nobody interferes. Nobody steps in, but in the past, people have stepped in when I've been shutting down comm arrays. In fact, a viewer of this channel, once actually stopped me from shutting down a comm array, which was absolutely hilarious. But this is kind of the ideal scenario of what is currently possible in the game working out. We are going to be using the Herald for this because, there are other ships that could conceivably be better for the level of hacking that we are capable of doing in the game, but I just have such a soft spot for the Herald. I love that ship, and I just want to see it be able to do something, so I just, I guess I kind of force it to do things. And the Herald can be pretty decent at this if you kind of, if you make certain allowances for it. It's actually not that bad. But I would love to see the system change. And I know that CIG, I think almost a year ago talked about the fact that they were on the cusp of making it so that we could remotely hack other players' crime stat. And I just think with some of the changes that I mentioned earlier, like we could... I think for very low investment, we could actually get hacking up there and make hacking a profitable and an enticing venture and something that isn't just so formulaic and luck-based. I think there obviously is going to be some work involved. There's going to be some artwork changes to certain stations involved. There's also going to be the necessity of making, at least, or adapting the existing hacking UI to work remotely rather than directly. And of course, you would have to factor in transmission range, and you would have to add all these factors to the game. But I think that it would be a worthwhile investment because, one of the things, certainly when I was talking on Friday about some of the big ships that are coming into the game, is players need more variety in the things that they can do. And certainly players of the criminal variety are going to start to need a lot more variety in their activities. Otherwise, certainly with some of the ships that are coming into the game, things could get pretty ugly in the Star Citizen universe pretty quickly. And I think that, while we all want to have a certain level of risk in Star Citizen because it arguably makes for a better game experience, I think if we don't kind of manage these things correctly, it can get out of hand and it can really get ugly. And you could almost end up with a situation not unlike the launch situation of Worlds Adrift, which is something that I believe I mentioned in the last video, where a little too much PvP can be unhealthy for a game. And so I think that by exploring what we already have and making certain changes here or there, and I'm not going to mislabel them and say small tweaks or very easy things to do, because I know that there's a lot of work that probably has to go in on the back end to make something like this work. But I think that it would be worthwhile, and it would definitely be something that bears fruit for everyone in the game. And, while certainly mining has proven to be very lucrative, I think that this is another field, whether it's remotely hacking down another player's crime stat or maybe hacking down a NPC's crime stat, things like that. I think that this is an area that once we kind of kick open that door, there's a lot that we can do with it. And yes, there is that initial investment of time and resources to make it work, but the subsequent investments will be all that much easier. And overall, I think it would be a feature that benefits a lot of players. I mean, there are players who do earn crime stat completely by accident, unintentionally, and maybe they don't want to have to deal with that, and maybe they will look to a player who is specialized in this field, who knows what they're doing with hacking, and who says, for 5,000, 6,000 UEC, I'll fix your little crime stat problem for you. Because currently, removing crime stat, especially when you're limited to SPK or Lyria, is a very daunting task. And for some players, it's just easier to just let the authorities or another player kill you and just go to prison and get it over with. Like, the idea of just logging out and just not playing the game is preferable to actually playing the game the way that it's been kind of constructed. I think that when you start to get to that point, you've failed in your design. I would be very curious to see, but I would bet you that there's a lot of players who currently play Star Citizen or who are going to play Star Citizen who would like to basically dabble in the criminal underworld, but they're not really motivated to say, kill other players, but they want to be, they want to focus on kind of, these kind of dark areas of the Star Citizen underworld, and maybe they want to just be a hacker who goes around and hacking comrays. But currently the game is just not very friendly to that, and it's not a very skill-based thing, because if you think about it, all I'm going to do in here is I've got the Ripper, which I believe is currently the fastest chip, though it causes the most errors. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to hit continue 5 or 6 times, and then I'm just going to click shut down the array, and basically there's my 25,000 credits. That's it's not a really rewarding or interesting gameplay loop. It really isn't. So let's look at the Herald as kind of like the equivalent of the Prospector. The Herald, as you get the ship, it has limited range, which is, it's an issue we've discussed before. I believe that the Herald should actually be classified as a medium ship, or at least should have the equivalent jump drive and range of a medium ship, because it is technically an interstellar data transfer ship. It's meant to go from star system to star system transferring data, but it really doesn't have the range to do so. But for a player starting out with, let's say, a Herald, what if you ended up, you're going to be hacking satellites, so you're going to base yourself out of Grim Hex. Now, immediately around Grim Hex, you have basically, 3 real comm arrays that you're going to get missions for that you can shut down. So every time you log in, you have the potential to go and make 75,000 credits. With that, you hit all those comm arrays if you're careful, if you're quick, and if we alter the game system as I've kind of outlined, you could have enough money to save up that you could improve your Herald so that you could purchase a much more fuel efficient, quantum drive. Now all of a sudden you have access to the comm arrays at Lorville. You have access to the comm arrays at ArcCorp, at Microtech. Now you have so many more options that you can open up. Then you can start to alter your ship. You can go for modules that have much lower signatures, kind of effectively making your Herald even stealthier, making you harder to find while you're running these hacks. I think that, if you were to kind of alter the gameplay that way and make it so that players can kind of, once they start that hack running, if it's going to be a system like this where we're constantly having to push the continue button, this isn't really gameplay. right? Like, let's be honest. Let's be brutally honest. This is really not gameplay that requires player intervention because there's no real skill involved. You're just pushing a button when it lights up. This is something that, for all intents and purposes, should be automated. And what the player should be engaged in is maybe operating their ship at a very low power rating. And so when this satellite is sending out a signal that says, hey, someone's interfering with me, or I've got anomalous signals, and another player shows up to investigate, to hopefully hunt down who's been hacking this satellite, that, the real skill gameplay is the player who's now in that ship that is trying to be as stealthy as possible is maybe figuring out what the player who's hunting them with that ping is kind of trying to do and where they're going and what kind of a search pattern they're flying. And maybe they're just kind of raising their energy level just enough to get the engines on and just moving their ship out of the way. So they're constantly having to play this cat and mouse game with players who may be hunting them. And, instead of actually, just sitting there and just waiting the bar out, they actually have to kind of counter what the other player is doing. If they get spotted, that's when they would get crime stat, and they'd be like, oh no, this has been verified now. You've been seen hacking a satellite. Whereas, maybe the satellites are a little bit dumb and they can't really see you. Maybe specialized ships like the Herald or the MSR can blind the satellite sensors for a time, allowing a player to EVA in without getting crime stats, slip the chip in and get out. It only lasts for a little while, but I think that overall would make a far more interesting and rewarding experience, even with the limited assets that we have available to us now. And I think that if you did something like that, you could move hacking in Star Citizen up to par in terms of maybe not financial rewards, but in terms of rewarding gameplay. You can move it up to par with things like mining and like cargo hauling. And once we have a system like this in place, then it becomes a lot easier to iterate on in the future. Maybe you want to add some like kind of cyberpunk quick hack, mechanics or mini games to allow players to, change things up a little bit. Then you can go and looking at the hacking crime stat for other players and stuff like that, and maybe make that career even more lucrative in the future. We really do have a lot of these pieces kind of lying around. The problem is no one's kind of tied them all together. It's like we've got the skeleton, but we don't have the connective tissue that makes the skeleton work, right? This is kind of where I would like to see more energy go. Instead of just like, hey, you know what? We only have a limited amount of time. What do you want to do? Well, let's iterate on mining again. It doesn't, arguably all the careers need iteration, mining, cargo hauling, all of those things, but we're so close to being able to knock some of these careers into like playable and interesting. And I don't think that, from a layperson or from an outsider's point of view, it doesn't seem like it would require all that much, compared to, once again, sitting everybody down saying, let's do mining again. This is kind of where I would like to see something like this go. And this would offer some rewarding and very interesting PvP possibilities and also some gameplay possibilities for criminal players, which, frankly, we kind of want to kick open some of these doors because, as we've discussed before, if we just leave the pirates and the criminals of Star Citizen sitting around with all these weapons, what do you think they're going to do if we don't give them something to engage with, something meaningful and rewarding, right? So that is kind of in a nutshell how I would alter hacking, at least for what I would call a tier 1 implementation, because tier 0 is here. Not really great. I think we could do better. This is how I would evolve it. This is what I would look to make that change. Now, whether or not that's actually easy for CIG to do, that would be up to CIG to kind of fill in the blanks there. But it doesn't, from my point of view, it doesn't seem like an unreasonable effort. And I think that it would yield some really great rewards for not only people who own the MSR or the Herald or something like the Sentinel, but for the players who, plan to hunt those players who are doing nefarious deeds.
you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.